Okay. Hello and welcome everybody. Good evening, salutations, greetings. We are live streaming at the Shadow Path Studios here in Markham, Ontario, Canada. My name is Alex Caroli. I'm the Artistic Director of Shadow Path, and this is our industry slam session featuring slammer Marjorie Chan. Hi, Marjorie. How are you this evening?
I am pretty good. Thank you for having me.
Yay, we're very excited that you could be here tonight. Before we jump in, I will just quickly pass it over to Misa to do a land acknowledgement.
We would like to acknowledge the earliest storytellers that lived on the lands we now occupy. These are the traditional lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabemowin people. Because our artists and audiences hail from all over Toronto, York Region, and the GTA, we'd like to recite this prayer from White Cloud, the Iroquois people who created on and cared for the lands surrounding Lakes Ontario. O great spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds, and whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me. I am a human before you, one of your many children. I am small and weak. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty. Make my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunsets. Make my hands respect the things you have made, my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise that I may know the things you have taught my people, the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. I seek strength, O Creator, not to be superior to my brothers or others, but to be able to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me ever ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eye, so that when life fades at the setting sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame.
Thank you, Misa. So we have been doing industry sessions at Shadow Path for the past 3 years. Usually we would do them out in the real world, like over a coffee, but since 2020, we have done our industry sessions online, which is not such a bad thing because it does open up our audiences and make it more accessible to the public. We've called them industry slam sessions. SLAM is our acronym for She Leads an Arts Movement. We are meeting with women in the theater industry that are making their own paths, that are forging new, groundbreaking territory. They are decision makers, they are artistic directors, sometimes they are playwrights or managers. And this is to help us forge connectedness with them and to better understand what it takes to do what it is they're doing. So we have 4 panelists that will each ask a question, and we will see how many questions we get through this evening. Each panelist will briefly introduce themselves before they ask their question. But before we do that, I would like to just take a brief moment to read a short bio of Marjorie Chan. Here we go. Marjorie is a multidisciplinary theater artist working as a playwright, librettist, director, and dramaturge, and also artistic director. A 9-time nominee, Marjorie is the recipient of 4 Toronto Dora Awards. In 2005, she was named the K.M. Hunter Theater Artist, an Ontario-wide award for mid-career artists. In 2017, she was awarded the George Lescombe Mentorship in Theatre Award from Toronto Alliance for the Performing Arts. Marjorie was previously artist in residence at Banff Playwrights Lab, Cahoots Theatre, Factory Theatre, Theatre Direct Canada, Tapestry New Opera, SUNY in New York, and Theatre de Pif in Hong Kong. And now we will kick it off with our first panelist to ask her first question. T.
Hey, Marjorie, how are you today?
I'm good. Hi, T.
Hey, so I'm T. I'm an actor, an indie producer, and a martial artist based here in Toronto. And my first question to you is, can you speak on your experience as a woman of color in this industry? Like what kind of challenges you faced, and do you have any advice for female artists of color?
Thanks so much. It's such a, I started off as an actor. And I started off as an actor, as an Asian woman. I was coming out of theater school. I was probably 100 pounds soaking wet, and I had long hair down to the middle of my back. And I think about that now. That's a certain look. That's a certain aesthetic. And at that time, what was available to me was very particular in terms of the roles that were available to me. And really, as a young woman of color, I really had to make those choices about, is this a role that's reinforcing a stereotype and that is harmful? Should I take this role? If I take this role, what does it mean if I do? What am I gaining from it? And those were hard decisions. And I was a young woman, and I don't think I always made those right decisions. So I would say both in this industry, but in particularly as an actor, you really have to weigh those decisions. I would say the truth is that, that was, I graduated theater school in 1996. That was a very different era in which I was graduating into. But really, unfortunately, with the number of women that I work with and the actors that I work with, I'm still seeing the same problems, and I'm still seeing the same systemic issues in the industry. What has changed is, for the young women, there's probably more outlets for them to speak to, and more choices. And also, in that respect, certainly there's less tolerance of that. And so there's more space for that. If I was going to translate that into general advice, the truth is the world is still not built yet for women of color. And so there's always going to be barriers, doors, outright no's, slams in your face, all of those things. People wanting to put you in a box, people wanting to stereotype you. All of these things will all continue to be true. What has changed is the fact that there's more opportunities than ever for women of color. So although those structures are still there and still can be an impediment, really the opportunity is to be like, maybe you're knocking on a door that actually is not ready for you and won't support you if you walk through that door. But now I think if you turn around, go and find the door that's open, because there are open doors, and then you're not bloodying your knuckles on a door that maybe you actually don't even want to go through, right? So it is to really consider that for yourself, that you still need a strong sense of self to work through. I know that, like, Mindy Kaling has something that she said once, that people say to her, like, "Oh, you seem confident," and she always replies, like, "Why? Why do you think I shouldn't be confident? Because I'm a big woman? Because I'm brown? Because I'm a woman? Why shouldn't I be confident?" And so, for young women of color, I think it's really important to understand your worth, and to understand that that you have something of value, and you should move through the world accordingly in that manner. And it's hard. Sometimes I get applications and things like this, and as a young woman of color, they've completely undervalued who they are, and in terms of just even going, what are they, in terms of an amount even, or the rate that they're paying themselves, or in a situation where they're like, "Oh, well, what is your previous rate of pay for that work?" If you wanted to quote that, and they would quote an amount that was like a quarter of the last person who was paid for that job, who was a white male. And you're like, okay, so this is what we're going to pay you. And that comes from, I think, for women of color, making sure that you're talking to each other right? You don't know what other people are being paid unless you're sharing and you're having these conversations. If you can work together for that, that's going to be better for everyone. You know, someone wrote recently to me, and it's such an interesting comment, that like most competitive systems, no one wins out of that system. But when you're collaborative, then everyone moves ahead a little bit. And I thought, especially true for young women, that there's a lot of protectionism around their own role and things that they're doing. But the more the conversations they can have, the more information's out there, and the more that women can support each other.
Thank you so much for that.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. I'm really excited. Thank you for that previous answer. I am also a third generation immigrant from South Asia, and I am an emerging director, and I work in community arts. I forgot to say my name. My name is Malika. And I guess the question I have for you is, as someone who is a second generation Asian Canadian, I believe, what advice do you have for other children of immigrants who are trying to authentically craft their stories and their voices?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question. You know, when well, so many of us, unless we're Indigenous, we're immigrants to this land, and the truth is, I kind of think of Canada. I just think of how much land there is, which to me, I don't know why I'm getting. I think of, there's so much land. There's so many stories that are possible. There's so many stories that are worthwhile, and every single one is worthwhile. There's so much room for the nuances and the creativity and the diversity from around the world that come, and further to that, as those generations land and live here and grow here and create all that, there's so much space for that. And, you know, to me, I feel like that's, some of that work has to be done by the artists themselves, is demanding the space. And that's really, to me, about actually doing it. And I know it's like, how do you craft that authentic voice? You won't get there unless you try. That's it. And it's like putting yourself out there so that you actually have an opportunity for something to shift, so something to change, to understand your aesthetic. You won't really understand it if you're all still thinking about it and you keep it all private to yourself and no one ever sees it. We don't call that theater, right? Like, if no one ever sees it, what is it? If there's a theater show in the woods and no one sees it, what is it? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think it's theater. So really, it's like taking that opportunity and to actually do the work. You don't know it until you try it. You won't know your aesthetic until you try it. So if you feel like, oh, I feel like my aesthetic's here, well, you should always be pushing on that. You should always be challenging yourself in terms of that. I always say, if you're not failing sometimes, it means that you're not anywhere near the edge. That means you're in the center of your comfort zone and you're never pushing your own boundaries, right? And so you never really know what's actually possible and what the potential is in your work, because you've never tried to push outside of it. You've never tried to challenge yourself. So it's important to fail. And I think that's really difficult. That's really difficult if you're talking about inside of an immigrant culture and a newcomer culture. I'm like, in people like, yeah, Marjorie, I'm not going to go to my immigrant dad and say it's okay to fail because Marjorie Chan said so. It's not going to fly. But that kind of risk, that living with an opportunity for risk and knowing that you can always step back. What's genuinely at risk when you take an artistic risk, right? Actually think about it. We're privileged. We're privileged to be on these computers in this Zoom call to have this conversation about an art form that still is actually a privileged art form. It's necessary because our stories are necessary and necessary to share, and we crave the human connection, we crave the human stories. But at the same time, you know, we do have to be realistic. What's the actual risk? When you actually think of it that way, I hope that makes you feel more brave, because what's actually going to happen if I include the hippopotamus in this play. What happens? What's the worst thing that can happen, right? I think the worst thing that can happen in terms of risk is people getting hurt and harm happening to audience members because of poor process or poor conduct inside of a process. That's the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is not that, well, we tried the hippopotamus and it was terrible and nobody liked it and nobody came. That's okay. That's actually okay. Move on, do the next thing. So I guess I went on a little bit, but it's a little bit about understanding that the stories are important, but they do require some bravery to get there. And in our communication and in the ways that we explore that aesthetic, to take those chances, so that there is, when you make those leaps, you're creating more space for not just your story, but the other stories of the next generation too.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Marjorie. I hope you're well. This is my name is Melissa Ho. Hi. I've worked in theater and production and events planning for over 12 years, and my background in theater is more in the technical elements like lighting, design, sound, stage production, and stage management. And I produce all types of corporate, community, and live performance events. So in my work, I work a lot with creative creators and talented artists. So my question is more on the creative production side. For yourself as a playwright and a librettist, where do you draw your inspiration from in creating new pieces of work? Where does your process begin? And can you take us through your thought process?
Great. So I think as a playwright and a librettist, my process is a little bit different, very different processes, different forms in some ways. I would say my plays are they're really driven by need. I don't have any like kind of casual, maybe I'll just try this idea and put this together, put that. They're driven by need, and as you know, I write a lot of plays with historical context and a lot of plays kind of centering Chinese culture from my perspective, and so it's usually something that just like hits me to the core, and I'm forced to examine it. I say, I can't let this go. I can't stop thinking about it. And that's usually when the play comes. And sometimes it comes in a fever of writing that I'm like, it must be like this. I would say for plays, often that examination or that thinking, or it's not so obsessive, but it is kind of like, oh, it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back to me and I can't quite shake it. There's an image, and it's usually ends up being the final image of the play or the final image before an epilogue. And I am lucky that the plays that I've been lucky to see, to fruition have been so because I've seen that image and I said, I'm going to get there. And then as a playwright, I have a goal. I know what that last image is. I know what that last scene is. The last scene of my first play by China Doll is almost exactly the same as when it was first written, because I was like, and I wrote it first. I was like, that, okay? I don't know what the rest of it is. It takes me time to figure it out, but it's like that I can see that's either, I don't want to say message, but I know what that final moment is, I think, and so I write to that. It's either the final moment, the exact final moment, or the moment before an epilogue. And that's true for almost is it true for every single one of my plays? Yes, even the ones that don't necessarily deal with Chinese culture or created collaboratively, I see that at the end. So in terms of that process, I feel like that's helped me because I've been able to kind of reverse engineer that. Then you have a vision in mind and kind of how you're building characters towards that moment or how you're building towards that final image. And to me, it's the emotional satisfaction of it that somehow in all my imaginings and however I'm imagining or obsessively researching or not, that I'm like, I want to get to there. So then I have to figure out how to cultivate that in the characters, how to cultivate that so that the audience is taken on that journey to get to that moment. So that's kind of my process for my playwriting. I would say as a librettist, it's very different because it's a collaborative form and you're working with a composer. And so I say this about libretto writing. I say singers sing, composers compose, and librettists, I say that librettists liberate the music. So that's how I think about writing the text for opera. So it's a different relationship to the words. The words are there to serve the story and to serve the character. It does all the same things as the play, but my job there is to make sure that there's space, opportunity, potential for the composer to really lift that. And that's a really critical difference in terms of the ideas that I think of and the approach dramatically for when I write plays and for when I write opera. When I write plays, usually if my play looks like this, like kind of, this is a bit Aristotelian, but whatever, like my plays look like this, like they go, I write, and it's like, oh my goodness. Then set, design, costume, all of that for a play, everyone comes in and like they push. I write here, and they kind of like they fill out that mountain so that we can feel that fullness, right? That's all the design that writes that. When I write for opera, I write here like this. At that point, it doesn't go to production. At that point, the composer comes in. So at that point, what the composer does is they take it from there and they keep building that up until we have this grand piece, even if it's an intimate opera. But that's the emotional arc that happens when you're in collaboration, that you're building that piece. And instead of at that point, we all fill it in with a theatrical production. No, the composer pushes it further and pushes that drama way further. And that's the critical difference between playwriting and writing for opera and writing text for opera. So my approach is a little bit different, knowing that I have to leave space for the rest of that, and also foundationally, how do I hold that so that the music can really soar?
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I love the passion in your words.
Hi, Marjorie. My name is Maisa. Thank you. This has been so inspiring and illuminating and like eye-opening. It was wonderful. I write an audio drama, a sci-fi audio drama. But my question for you is, how do you think we can highlight female artists with an atmosphere of inclusivity for everyone? And I mean like gender, intersectionality, disability, so everybody is included and welcome.
Yeah, it's such an interesting statement that I just also want to unpack, because I'm just trying to also understand. So something I'm responding to, which may not be your intent, but something I'm responding to is that I think a lot of times, not a lot of times, it's very truthful that, an artistic director might read a play and say, well, no, we already have a Chinese play this season. Or they might say, well, this play is just for women, so we already have one this season. It's generally, the numbers generally bear that out. We already have one this season. And so it's a kind of idea that work made by women, stories made by women are not already ultimately universal. So there's something wrong with our society. First of all, that's something wrong about our society. That's very hard to fix, like us one at a time. It's very hard for us to systemically tear down everything. It's like it's exhausting. It's hard to tear it all down. Shadow Path is trying, I know. So I just wanted to kind of like unpack that and examine that. And so, what if I think mine said like the real way to do it is to make sure that you're intentionally thinking the opposite. And the opposite is every woman's story is important, and every woman's story is universal. Every woman's story is already inclusive. It's interesting to think of it that way, right? It's interesting to think, oh, okay, someone I know that I trust very much, a dramaturg and director that I've worked with in the past, she always says the universal is in the specific. So that the more that we know, the more that we share that story, the more that we know, the more vulnerable that we understand that story, and the more we're able to have empathy for that story and the potential for that story to be universal. I'm not sure if that's what your question actually is, but I often think of it that way, and to be truthful, to self-check in terms of that. Am I thinking of that story? But if I make the opposite assumption that the story is universal, it's just how do we figure out how to let the audience in so that they feel it? Then you're taking a different approach, right? You're making the assumption already that everyone, it could appeal to everyone. So that's point one. I would say in terms of inclusivity, the other thing that I really think about is that, the truth is the way that we make theater is not accessible to a lot of people. It's not accessible linguistically, it's not accessible sometimes socioeconomically, it's not accessible often to individuals who might be blind, who might be deaf, and etc. And I feel like it's an important question, and this is a question that I use to check myself as well, is that when you're making the art and it's not accessible to someone else and to a particular community, for a community that's marginalized, it's as good as saying that that person is not welcome. So, an example would be, a horrible example would be is if I made a play and I decided it was all going to be in Cantonese. And that was my decision. I made a play, it's in Cantonese. We're going to do it in Markham, tons of Cantonese speakers. But I didn't provide any English surtitles. And I didn't do any marketing in English. There was no help at the box office in English. And there was no other assistance. To me, that clearly says that piece is only for Cantonese speakers and that English speakers are not welcome. So I'm just placing it that way. I'm just flipping it that way because we go, oh yeah, I don't know that I would go to that play. Now, I'm also saying with the caveat, sometimes some plays are for their community only. And that's a choice in terms of a play, in terms of an artist. I think an artist has space to do that. I think not every play necessarily is supposed to be for everyone. Certainly someone said to me, everything about your play I hated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I usually say, thank you for coming. Thank you. I say, thank you. And that's the response, I've as an artistic director, I've programmed plays and, the audience would be all filled with one community and they'd be laughing and interrupting and doing all sorts of things. And someone said to me, I know, I guess people liked it, but I didn't really like it. And and it's like, maybe it wasn't for you. And they're like, but I paid to come see this play. I understand. But if you didn't have space, if a full, there's nothing I can say to convince you or to appease you, because if a full audience, sold out house is completely enjoying a play and you're not, who's the problem here? Who isn't letting that play inside, right? Who actually, and so there's nothing I can say to help except say, thank you so much for coming. That's all I can say. That's the limit of it. So that's my caveat to yes, yeah, to really how you think about it. It's very easy for people to feel unwelcome at a play. So we have to be more intentional if we do want to welcome individuals and of any community. But it's also true that some some plays, as is their right, is not, every single play is not right for everyone.
Thank you so much. I like the way you flipped them for a whole other perspective. It was very helpful. Thank you.
Marjorie, you've inspired me to like write a play right this second. Like I need to leave the call and just go write a play quickly and then I'll come back.
Yes.
Yes. That's actually how I started producing. I wanted work for myself as an actor, and I know a lot of indie artists have started picking up producing just to create meaningful work for themselves. So I wanted to know if you had any advice for these artists and myself from an AD point of view or from experiencing this yourself.
Yeah. So I think it's really great. I think it's really great to take the things that you can control into if you have the capacity, into your own control. Because, people say, oh, being, I started as an actor, then I was a writer, as a dramaturg, then I'm an artistic director, and people are like, don't you feel like, you get torn? And it's like, no, it's amazing because I can choose the best of everything that I want to do, and I have some agency, and that as a revelation, is huge, to be able to have, to be able to make those decisions about your piece. Now, I would say find one really good tip is to find like-minded people, and to find people who might be in a similar place as you, to be able to just share that knowledge and share with each other. And the other thing is that the truth is producing is hard. Producing is super hard. It's hard to do. And it's easy to do when it's you have a huge passion for it, and passion for the piece, and the energy to see that piece through. What's really going to help you are practical skills, right? And so that's to figure out how you can learn those skills and how you can gain those as you produce, right? There's organizations that actually teach that. I don't know if you know of Generator, but they actually run a really excellent course. There's many courses that are run by like Fringe, Summerworks, and the councils that kind of give, kind of at least like either full courses about producing, or also just like one-offs from like, TAPA, if you know TAPA as well, one-off. This is just about budgeting. This is just about, this seminar might just be about this. And during the pandemic, this is a great time to look for those courses that live online. And I know that seems like, I don't want to go back to school because I just went to school and I'm an artist. Now what? Like, it's like, yes, but having those tools will help you be a better producer and help you better in your conversations with theater companies. Unless you're actually looking to completely self-produce. The likelihood is you're probably looking to partner with somebody, either another smaller organization or a theater company that has operating funding, right? So, you do want to come in and be able to have those conversations. And so having a little bit of knowledge and just a little more industry knowledge helps you with those conversations. What I'm saying is, look, this is the system that we work in. Am I saying that this is the right way? Am I saying this is the right support for independent artists? No, I'm not saying any of those things right now. I will not commit on video to saying those things. But what I'm saying is having some knowledge of the industry at large and some of the kind of financials around that and some of the kind of more pragmatic things helps you in those conversations. The truth is, a little more insight into the system helps you navigate it, right? I would say that, one thing that I learned being on, having been independent artist before I became an artistic director, having been artistic director at a small organization, now at a mid-sized organization, is you always think someone else has more. You always think someone else has more resources. And you always think, like, as an independent artist, I would say, I look and say, I don't know why that play got that support. My play needs support. So you always think that. You think, oh my goodness, my play deserves support. It's good to believe in yourself. It's fine. It gets you somewhere. But it's also toxic thinking, because then, you're at a small organization and you're actually realizing, oh, my pot of money is just like this big. I can only support like a few people. Like, this is how big it is. And so, like, as a small organization, you look at an organization and you look at someone that has a building, you're like, they have building. They have so much. They should just, I should have that. We should have that. Should we have that? Do we deserve that? We do, right? We deserve that. It's probably true, but that isn't the scenario that's placed in. Or then you're like us, like you're like TPM. We're like, oh my gosh, like, well, oh my goodness, like the other companies on Bathurst, their budgets are twice the size of ours. This is true. It's like, how are their budgets so much bigger than ours? How are we doing the same kinds of things? We're doing the same number of things. How's that possible? How is that possible? And the truth is, down the street or whatever company is down the street, neither of those companies, I love those companies, but they're like looking down at Berkeley and Distiller and going, look at those companies. How come they have so many spaces? How come it's so big? What's happening, right? So they're having the same conversations each time. That's about scarcity and that's about resources, right? So just to know that already is happening, and then the people down the distillery are like, I don't know why the NEC, I don't know, they're huge. I don't know why they have so much support. They're having the same conversations. To understand that is to at least know what's happening and how those resources are allocated. Again, I won't commit on video to saying that I think it's a completely fair system, but understanding that and knowing that knowing that these conversations are happening at all of those levels, right? And that people are trying to work with the resources that they have. I don't know if that answers your question. And just in terms of, as a producer, how you begin to navigate, how, to me, gaining knowledge, gaining a little more industry knowledge, making those connections, networking, finding your people that feel like the people that you're going to move with. I think it's actually really hard. And when you find people that you can work with, if you can find people that you can disagree with and work with, hold them close, hold everyone close, because you will go far, because you'll start to challenge each other. You'll challenge each other's ideas. And if you can do so respectfully, your ideas will grow. And as artists and a company, probably, potentially, that will grow as well.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Hi again. I just want to say that your energy is palpable. Like your passion transcends the world of Zoom, which I love. Thank you so much for sharing what you have with us so far. My question for you is, what major lessons and insights have you learned about yourself through the development of your plays?
What insights have I learned about the development of myself? I think it's hard. It's super hard. Plays are so personal. I think I was so one major lesson from my plays is I was so protective. I was protective of every period, every comma, every the, and it made no sense. It made no sense because even as myself, I had to act in my first play that I wrote because there were so few actors around. But even in that, I was never letter perfect. I wrote the play and I was never letter perfect because that's not how theater works. And that's not how the energy works. And that's not how, even in dialogue and even as you go through rehearsal, you're like, stuff's going to change and it's going to feel different. And there's going to be a rhythm that's different. And so the truth is that should have been a lesson I learned from my first play, but it took me a while. It took me a while to learn that. And that there's more space for things. So I would say that that's dependent, depending on the room that you put people in and depending on the actors and the director. Directors always say to directors, there are directors that really like the writer in the room all the time. And there are directors who are like, get the writer away until we're staged and then they can come back. And kind of myself as a writer and a director, I'm kind of the opinion, I've given it to you, I trusted it to you and to this company. I'm going to come back when it's a little further staged. I'll answer questions or whatever, but I don't need to be here as you dissect it. I don't need to be here. Some of that's painful because some of it as a writer, they're working through that whole thing. And you're like, I don't need to hear that whole thought process because I already went through that whole thought processes myself when I was going through it. So That's why I put in a play. I don't need you to work it out. They need to work it out because they're the actor, but I don't need to be there. So partly some of that, and as well having a trust in the director. If I'm at my rehearsal a lot, it's actually because I need to be, because either the play is not being interpreted, and my writing is not clear enough for the actor, so their intentions are not clear, or they've misinterpreted, and so I have to be there to kind of like talk about it, fix things that need fixing that aren't working. If I'm there a lot, it's because it's like it's a bit rough going. I will say. So it's interesting. It's in terms of that, I really just learned how to have trust when there is a senior artist working on it. If you trust the director's vision, then you can step back a little bit. And yeah, it might not be letter perfect. They might make a cut, and you go, what's the risk if this is cut? What's the risk if there's a hippopotamus in your play? It's not a huge risk, right? So just to be brave, I'm like, cut it. Let's try it. You know what? In Lady Sunrise, I tried a different ending every night for every preview. And opening night, I had a rehearsal. So I did not see a rehearsal of the last scene. And I emailed them. I said, how'd it go? And they're like, bang on. I'm like, I knew it. That's the one. And it was. And it played on opening night. And I'm like, that's it, right? See? There you go. You know, I could have kept the ending that was, 5 previews ago, but I didn't, because I knew it wasn't just exactly right. It takes a bit of courage to go every night. I'm rewriting it until we get it. And I did. It was a different, every preview night had a different ending.
And it was brilliant.
Depends on which preview you came to, though.
I'm gonna jump in here a little bit because I can't believe it. I blinked my eyes and 45 minutes has gone by. Marjorie, you are so exuberant and energetic and exciting to chat with, and you have so much enthusiasm that I feel like you've inspired us all to start new projects and reach out to collaborators. And I really appreciate the time and energy that you took to be here with us tonight and to answer our questions. It was awesome. I took a lot of notes that I'm going to probably review immediately, starting now. And and I also just want to thank our panelists for your questions and your sharing space and making this event possible. And of course, to all our viewers out there who are also participating and sharing space here. So what can I say? We've done it again, and I'm really excited. I'm trying to be positive and optimistic for the new year that is coming just around the corner, and we can take some of this inspiration and enthusiasm and apply it to this brand new year and chat about it in the very near future. So thank you to all. Have awesome conversations. Be safe, be well, ask questions, make art from your heart, and we will do it again next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was fun. Thank you.